Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chainy podcast. I am your host, Nathan Chaney, and today we're going to talk about WMSs of all things. It's pretty elementary and foundational in the world of logistics and supply chain, but to be honest, we haven't had anybody on the podcast yet come on who is affiliated and an expert in the world of WMSs and warehouse management systems. So really happy to have David Yarbrough on from Logiwa to come on, talk not only about what he's doing today, but talk a little bit about the past and the history that he's had in the industry, and just kind of educate people about WMSs. And toward the end of the podcast, we'll kind of get into the weeds a little bit. So stick around for that if you really love warehouse nerd stuff. So David, thanks for coming on. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure can. Thanks for having me, Nathan. It's really a pleasure. Longtime fan, first time commentator here. So this is pretty exciting. But yeah, my career, I'm 50 years old, about to be 51. So it puts me in an interesting time frame when it comes to supply chain. So if I can take you back in time, my kind of supply chain career started back in '97, kind of right out of school. I started working for a pharmaceutical company that did specialty pharmaceutical distribution, and they actually did it before it was really cool to do it. So if you think about the timing of that, that's why I brought up my age, is because back then, while you still could ship UPS, you could do all that, everything was manual. And so I did that role. We had multiple sites, we had multiple distribution centers. I did that role for about 10 years. And everything we did besides customer service was all done manually on spreadsheets. And so how that would work is you had inventory that was tracked on spreadsheets, which there was some computers were kept mainly for the tracking of the drug data. So like if you're familiar with pharmaceuticals.
And sorry, when you say spreadsheets, you mean like physical pieces of paper spreadsheets, or
well,
okay, just wanted to
both, really. I mean, seriously, both. I mean, sometimes you're filling one in, and then sometimes you're actually on the computer just trying to type it in, or you created one. We got really handy at creating these, I don't even remember what you call them, these, you're running these little macros and all sorts of stuff, just to try to help us keep inventory straight. And so there were systems out there that were tracking the in-depth, like what they call the NDC numbers around pharmaceuticals and things like that, because that was a government regulation. You had to keep that stuff. But other than that, that was as far as it went. So what we learned in that time frame was, you could do it, right? So we maintained millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of inventory in multiple sites, and we were able to ship them. There were a ton of problems around, did you always have what you needed? How did it relate to where you were shipping from? None of that existed. So you were just at the mercy of knowledge. I think that's why I had a job for so long. It's because I had that knowledge, the tribal knowledge. And then I think now back to that, I'm going to skip around time frames here, but as you think now, the technology that I even sell today with Logiwa is, if I had that, we would have been so efficient. There's no telling how much money we would have saved. We didn't even know. So when you think about, if you skip forward, so that takes me 97 to 2007. And ever since 2007, when I got into the supply chain warehousing world, and mainly WMS, that's where I've been that entire time. So as I look back, I think, wow, technology has not only gone from everything can be tracked in a system now, but now AI is there, and I'm sure we'll get on that in a little bit. And then you have, I can actually look at labor. How many people do I need to do a certain job? Or how long should it take? Or, hey, this is so easy. All I got to do is pick up my device and go into the warehouse and scan. And if I need to have an add-on to my system, I can just go onto a marketplace and add that on. So those are things we never thought about. If you go back to that, that 20 years-ish ago, if my math is correct, that we didn't know. And really, it didn't even matter at the time. But would I go back and do it the same way? Absolutely not, because this technology we have now is so much better.
Sure. So am I hearing right that you kind of did warehouse management stuff before warehouse management systems really existed, really kind of came into being? So can you talk about what was the first WMS? Do you recall what it is?
Yep. So interesting enough, you are correct. So we did WMS functions, but we did them in our brain, and we did them on spreadsheets, and that was keeping track of everything in the operation. And quite frankly, the first WMS I ever touched really was one that I sold. So when I flip-flopped roles and I got into selling WMS, it was like okay, I understand now why the customer says XYZ. Like this is the problem they're having. And instead of me just being able to nod my head, blank stare going, yeah, I get it. It was like, nope, lived it. I know exactly where you're coming from. And especially if they were coming off a spreadsheet or trying to do something that was out of the ordinary, it was so easy for me to sit back in my own brain and go, I lived that. I know exactly what you're going through. And then you kind of give them little excerpts around, did you have this problem? They're like, yep. I'm like, yep, I did too. So I think it made me a lot more credible, but it also allowed me to learn more about what my customer base was doing and why, getting more into the depth of the brain of why they were doing it that way, and to let them know that they weren't alone, especially in that transitional period from, we'll call it, 2010 to now, where things really, I think, started to expand, and even 2015, where I think more about where technology really started taking more of a role in those operations.
Sure. Now I feel like there's another WMS that comes on the market every week, something probably. So also kind of your story you just shared kind of sounds like the typical story of someone having come from an operations background and working in the business, and then kind of moving into that business development sales role and really being able to understand the pains that a customer is going through, an operator is going through, and be able to kind of intelligently speak to them and tell about how that system that they might be selling addresses those pain points, and really kind of be able to talk at their level because they've been there and done that, right?
That's right.
So let's maybe back up a hair more to, David, growing up years, kind of where'd you grow up and how did you find your way into working in that first kind of pharmaceutical warehouse in the first place?
So I have a pretty good story, but it's a story I hate to tell because if parents have kids, they want to have them stay in college. Mine's not the story, right? Because I didn't stay in college. So the way my story kind of worked out, so I grew up in Carrollton, and I've always lived here most of my life. I was actually born in Memphis. My dad worked for General Electric. Ironically enough, my dad worked for GE back in a time. I would have been about, well, when I was born up till I was I forget what year he quit, but during that time frame, so we're talking late 70s, right? So late to mid 70s, early 80s. And he worked for General Electric, but he worked for GE back when they were doing their small parts distribution centers. And you're too young to remember this, but I vaguely remember it. So we all know about Sears catalog and all that kind of stuff, right? Because it's famous. Well, what we forget about is these large companies like GE, before there was any type of e-commerce distribution, if you wanted to get parts to an end user, so let's say I'm a GE customer and I have a refrigerator and I have a part that breaks. Well, the only way to really get me a part, and we're talking way back in the 70s, you didn't go online and order it. You probably called somebody, and then more than likely you went and picked it up at some sort of a distribution center, and that's what GE was doing at the time. So my dad, ironically enough, was in charge of opening up these distribution centers around the United States. They were going to open them up in Memphis, Kansas City, Dallas, Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, they were going, and you could see strategically they were hitting all those major markets because if Nathan Cheney needed a part for your refrigerator, they would send you to the local distribution center or send your repair person over there to pick up the part. So that's what he was doing. So, and I only tell that story because that got us from Memphis to Kansas City to Texas. And that's as far as it went. My dad became a minister, and the rest is history. So that's as far. But he worked for GE for a long time. So it was always interesting that he had that background. And you talk about doing it in the days where they just had gigantic catalogs full of data. If you wanted to find a part, you went in. Again, you're probably too young to remember even going into places where they used to pull up catalogs like at a parts place, and you would go through the microfiche to look a part up, or you'd go through the catalog and have to find the number. Then they go cross-reference it to the warehouse, pick it, you know what I mean, and that kind of stuff. So that's where I really didn't have an interest necessarily in supply chain until when I was in college. I was taking some economics courses, and that's where I got a little bit of interest going, that's kind of, I like how products are made, and I was kind of starting to understand the rhyme and reason behind the economics of how businesses run, still not to the detail of the supply chain, but I had someone call me and they said, hey, we've got a company that's looking for somebody to come run an operations for them, run, the warehousing operation, but it's a startup, Who knows what's going to happen? And I'm like, man, that sounds really fun. And college to me was super boring. So I mean, it was just like some more rounds of high school. So I thought I'm going to try it. I can always go back to college. I was the normal age to be in college, so I wasn't behind or anything like that. So I thought I'm going to go try it. Well, little did I know that that job would start me on a path. The company grew. It's the pharmaceutical company I was talking about grew leaps and bounds. We took it from nothing to whatever it was, and it ended up selling off a couple of times, and that gave me my career. And then from there, when I was able to flip flop that into the supply chain side, I look back. If I'd have never had that experience, I don't think I'd have been any good at this side of it. And people may debate if I am or not, but I think I am. I would never had that experience to be able to make it where I have today. So I believe that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'm not saying don't go to college, but I'm also saying if opportunity knocks on the door, don't hesitate to go take it, because you don't ever know where that might be able to take you in the future.
What were you studying when you were in school?
Mainly it was business economics. I think I was going to go for a computer science. That was the big deal back then. It really meant nothing, right? But it was the economics courses when I started taking more and more economics courses. And this was just in junior college, because I hadn't figured out what I wanted to do for my 4 year yet. I just was going through junior college at the time, just getting
Right.
those little ones out of the way. But the economics course had come up as part of that I could get in. And when I started really liking it, I never liked that stuff in high school, but when I started getting into that, I thought, wow, there's something really here, but how can I take that and make a living off of it? And that's where I look back now and I think that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, yeah. So you did kind of the pharmaceutical, it gave you like a nice background, and then it looks like you jumped into working for a WMS provider,
Correct.
and then it sounds like Logiwa is maybe your second stop on that
It
journey.
is. It is. So I stayed 15 years at the first stop, and that was for two reasons. One, it's not that I'm opposed to change, but I feel like if you're making an impact, and I had built up my network so well, it was like, why would I leave unless I have to? So there wasn't, I wasn't, if you look at a lot of resumes, unfortunately or fortunately for a lot of people in our space, they have a ton of jobs. And I don't know if that's good or bad. Did I miss opportunities? Maybe. But in a way, did I not get more of really the basics of what I wanted out of that by staying at one spot and working that network and getting it to where everybody knew me and I knew people? Yes, I think so. And so if you look at my if you look at my resume, it's pretty boring. It goes from college to one job and another job. That's pretty much it. And that's where I am today. I've been at Logiwa for about almost 3 years, 2 and 3/4, we'll call it, years. And it's exciting to me. And I think I'm drawn to that high-paced environment that's high tech, and especially if you're surrounded by the right people and the right system that can support it, the sky's the limit to me, and especially in the world that we live in today.
Yeah, yeah. You might have wished that you spent a little bit more time working on that computer science degree at this point, because I mean that's obviously pretty hot and in demand today, and everything really revolves around computers and data and
That's right.
programming. At least on the making the tool, right? And then you've
That's
got
right.
once you have the tool, then you've got to go out and operate it, use it, sell it, maintain it, all that sort of good stuff. So,
That's
um,
exactly right.
talking about college and talking about careers and that sort of thing, a question I usually like to ask everybody is thinking of that business college student and having them in mind right now. Any suggestions of what you've seen over the years and going to different conferences and shows and events and that sort of thing? Suggestions for them on where to spend their time if they wanted to do something like what you're doing today, kind of working in the high tech systems, sort of operation systems in supply chain.
So the main advice I like to give is don't ever be afraid to ask questions, and always, always, always find mentors that can take you where you need to go. That's one thing I've always done. even with competitors, I'll run into a younger person that works maybe even a competitor, and they'll find me at a show, and sometimes I'm flattered because they'll know me, right? They'll come up, hey, I've seen you on LinkedIn. You've been around a while. Do you have any advice? I'm like, absolutely, I have advice. And I'm not telling you my sales secrets. That's what makes me me. But I will tell you how to make it in this industry, and I'll tell you what's important. I'll tell you things like all relationships are important, or you can only learn by asking questions, or go find different technologies, follow the technology. Like when I go to a show today, like I'm going to plug it. I'm going to see a CMP coming up, right? Now, when I go, what is David Yarbrough going to do? I could sit back and kind of go, I know all these people there. I could just go, I will walk the show aisle by aisle. I'll find a booth, and I'm very careful about doing this because again, I'm just walking, so I don't want to bother them. But at the same time, I'm like, what are you doing? This seems interesting. How does it impact what I'm doing, and how can we maybe work together? But the main thing I want to know is if I can know more about what you're doing, and this is the advice I would give to those same folks that need to know that are coming up into school. It's like, I'm going to put that in my little database up here. And when someone asks, I'll know that, oh, you're talking about drones. Well, there's this company I met at CSCMP that does these drone and they take cycle counts and blah, blah, blah. I don't have to be an expert in it, but I can connect people. And I believe that's probably where everything I just said goes to. Being the person that can connect, I think, is invaluable, because there's even a career in that. Like when I finally get too old to do this and don't want to travel anymore, I can consult, right? People may call me just to say, David, who do you know that can do XYZ? I'm like, I probably know that person. I mean, heck, you and I met probably through just, we don't know each other. We do now, but it's like we knew of each other, and that's how you meet people. You reach out and you make those connections. So that to me has to be the number one, is don't be afraid to ask and go make those connections, because it never hurts.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine, Fred Ragsdale, on the podcast. He's at CBRE. He's a commercial real estate guy, and one of his piece of advice basically is just that he just is a connector of the dots, right?
Yep.
And even though maybe the person that you help solve a problem today, maybe David, you help someone with a forklift problem, and because the folks over at Shoppa's and Advanced Intralogistics, you can help out with some of the hardware sort of needs, right? And that doesn't necessarily help you today, but you help solve a problem, and you kind of start to get that credibility of just being a problem solver and a helper. And also what you were saying a while ago about making mental notes and just taking a quick snapshot of every single booth at that conference and putting them in your little mental castle in the back, because you never know when you're going to need to retrieve that and use it for something. A good example of that is I was at like a ProMat many years ago, and I saw for the first time ever an auto store system in there. And I was just blown away. I think I was just a little few years out of college, that sort of thing. And I just couldn't imagine this, again, this was over 10 years ago. And I was like, man, this has got to be bajillions of dollars. And what kind of company would ever use this? This is so fancy. And then, of course, if you fast forward a few years, I'm at Texas Instruments running their distribution center here in the US. And lo and behold, there's a big old auto store box in that facility, right? So, I became one of the managers of that, administrators for that type of system. But the first time I saw it, I was blown away by it. And later, as you progress in your career, these tools and these vendors and these suppliers, they become much more relevant. They become people that you're talking to on a daily basis. Even though at some point it might have just been just a booth that you passed 5 years ago at a show, and now you're on a call with them every week. You never know. So
you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Relationships matter. I mean, I would say that's another thing I would say is all relationships matter. You obviously want to have really good ones. And I will give you an example of how you never know when you're going to make a connection that's going to help you. So I was involved in a deal at my last company that went through an RFP process. And this might be some good info I am sharing a sales secret here, but of how I hate RFPs, by the way. I just think they're needed, but they're silly. And especially maybe to an old school guy like me that's just down, I'd rather just, how can I help you? If I can't help you, then let's just move on. But I get it. People want to do their due diligence, and RFPs are a part of that. And this company was doing that, and I had told them this process. I'm like, look, I'm really not interested in spending a lot of time on this RFP. I know I can help you, and how about you go do your RFP? If you don't get the answers you want, come back and let's talk. I left it alone. Well, come to find out, they really liked that advice. They were like, that was gutsy. And we kind of like that. So now we do want to talk to you because now we feel like you know what you're talking about. Well, little did I know that they knew somebody through like IWLA, who I was a member of. There was somebody else that they knew that I didn't know they were friends. So here I know this one guy really well at IWLA, and here's another customer I'm talking to, and they're buddies. Well, come to find out that the company ended up buying from my company, from me. And later on, I was at an event, and this guy came up to me at an IWLA event. He goes, "Hey, did such and such buy your system?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I know him. I told him to buy your system." And I'm like, "But you don't even have my system." He goes, "Doesn't matter. I like you. I think I like, you're going to help them." And I'm like, "I never would have put you two guys in the same room together." And he goes, "You don't ever know."
Wow.
So those are powerful instances of where you take care of your network. Don't ever. I mean, sometimes if someone's toxic, get away, and you'll know those people when you see them.
Yeah.
But going back to that advice, it's like you don't know who knows who, and this industry, as big as it is, it's tiny.
It is. Yep.
So.
Yep. I mean, whenever, these days when I'm adding someone on LinkedIn or something, it's not uncommon to have 100 or 200 or 300 connections in common, which is intense. And I don't even have that many connections compared to the folks that have a lot. So maybe let's dig in a little bit into the weeds a little bit of WMS and warehouse management these days. Clearly, you're out talking to operators and hearing about the kind of challenges that they're dealing with and what kind of opportunities they see. I learned the word the other day, probopportunities. So problem/opportunity, right?
Yep.
What are some like the common themes that you're hearing, I guess, a lot these days? Is there seem to be pointing in one or two different directions?
There is. So labor, and you probably knew I was going to say that, right? So everyone's about labor now.
Yeah.
Labor has presented itself. I posted something today on LinkedIn that I found online about Amazon's upping their, I believe they're going to up their pay. Don't quote me on this. I want to say it's a couple dollars an hour, give or take. I think their loaded cost is going to go up to almost $30 an hour, which is what I always use 22. So that's up a lot, and that's a loaded cost. But think about that. If that's really the case, that means everyone else has to compete with that. And now, if you're trying to get somebody, if you're in an area, if you're unfortunate enough, I'll call it, to be in an area that has an Amazon warehouse, guess what you're competing with? $29 an hour or 23 or whatever the actual number was. But that's what you're competing with. So now everyone's going, well, how do I compete in that area? But I might need to do what I'm doing today with less people. But yet I may need to triple my throughput. Well, that's the $1 million question, right? So labor's huge. We hear that all the time. And then the other thing we hear, or that I tend to get out of meetings, is a lot of companies will approach us, like at Logiwa, and they'll come and they'll say, "Hey, I need to solve this problem," or "Here's how we're doing it today." And sometimes I have to stop them. I'm like, "Okay, stop. You're trying to create the same issue that you currently have and just duplicate it into another system. That's not going to work because you're going to end up getting the same result later." So you have to be able to stop, think about where you want to get, and then make the necessary changes. And I believe people are getting better at that today, but it's a hard mindset operationally to say, I want to change fundamentally how I'm doing something to get probably to the same result, right? The same result, make money, and we can work backwards from there. Get it out on time, customer service, but you have to be willing to change that in between, and that's where those two things to me, and we could probably talk for hours on all the systems in the market and what they're good at and what they're bad at, but that's from those two things right there, you can disseminate, okay, I need something that helps me with labor because I'm short on labor. But I also need something that allows me the ability to make a quick change or test something really quick because I don't have time. My customer's demanding that I get everything out the door within 24 hours or 12 hours or whatever that number is. I don't have time to mess around with it. So I think that those right there are the two biggest ones I hear a lot.
Another one I think even that we talked about is almost like your friend that recommended to that one client to go with you. There's a lot of people that are kind of just trapped into legacy systems that they've had for a long time, and they don't really have the means, the time, the bandwidth, or whatnot to switch, and so they've just got to make the best out of what they have. And in a lot of cases, bolt on and just bring on like a labor management piece and a yard management piece, like all the different components that they need to run their operation with, because the core like legacy foundational system is not going to be able to be changed anytime soon. It's going to take an act of Congress to do that. And I think that there's, every now and then I get a wild hair and I think, oh, I'm going to go open up a fulfillment company myself, right? Everyone's doing it. And so I'm like, well, the cool thing is that I can go out and grab a brand new modular, all the bells and whistles, subscription style type of WMS. And I could probably be right out of day one, be more efficient and have lots more tools at my disposal than much larger companies that are kind of stuck in a legacy WMS kind of world. Any thoughts on that? Have you seen any use cases for that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So a couple of, I'm going to give you some David-isms, if that's a word that I always tell folks. These are if you've ever been and heard me in a panel, I always use these. In fact, if Kevin Lawton's listening, he's going to know that I said this one time I was on a panel with him, but these are kind of my things I go to. So, and Kevin better be listening, but it's a couple of things. One, it's if your technology isn't evolving, you should be very scared, right? And by evolving, it means if you're with a provider today, that's not giving you new stuff. We give it out monthly, right? I call it little Christmas gifts or holiday gifts, if you will. Every month, there's something new coming out because we have a roadmap, and it's just, we're a SaaS solution. You're just getting it, and you're never not able to use it. So that's the other black hole is, oh, you want this new technology was released? Sorry, Nathan, we developed this custom thing for you, and it doesn't work. But if you pay us, it's like, no, that's not the way it should work. So that's the first thing, is technology has to evolve or you should be very scared. The second one is fulfillment. I'll say fulfillment, but I'll use fulfillment as a broad term, but it could be B2B, D2C, B2C, doesn't matter. It's a race. It is a race to the top or it's a race to the bottom. And I'll use that scenario in the fact that think of how a NASCAR team operates. In NASCAR, you have a race that goes on and it's 400 laps, okay? And when there's a pit stop, which would be when you would in a warehouse, you would say, oh, let's make a quick change here. When the car comes in for a pit stop, what do? They tweak something, they change the tires, and they get right back on the track, typically before the group even comes around again. So you've really lost nothing. What you can't do is you can't bring the car in, take it to the garage, tear the motor apart, rebuild it, and get back out. Because once you got back out, guess what? Everybody's gone. They're to the next race. The race is over. It only lasts so long. And so that's what I tell people, that I feel like if you can come in and make the pit stop, tweak, get back out, you're much better off than trying to come in and do a rework. Because once you do the rework, that person that you were trying to help is now down the street with your competitor. And so the more time you can spend, or the less time you can spend making those tweaks, the better, which is why I don't care what provider you use, but if they can't make quick turnarounds, those quick pit stops, you are going to get left behind, and that's the race to the bottom. And I think you mentioned earlier, there's a ton of systems out there, and yes, there are. I hate when people come on and they'll say, I've been searching online for systems. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm in that space, and I hate that because you didn't get anywhere. All you saw were a bunch of names. You don't know anything about them. They each have something different, but in a way, you could take them and they're all the same until one point. Now the point could be different, but I'm saying they're all, do they all receive? Sure. Do they all do put away? Sure. But then it's like, okay, when I'm inside of that now, what if I have to make a change to the put away? Well, you just lost half the system because they're like, no, we don't do that. Or the other half may say, yeah, you can do that if you pay us X amount of money, but then you're on that custom code again. And I don't know if anybody wants to be, now the big guys want to be there and that's okay, but most people don't want to be there. So those kind of scenarios there are how I hear a lot of it being said and how I drive a lot of those conversations day in, day out.
Well, as you alluded to earlier, we can't have a conversation in supply chain these days without talking a little bit about the little AI 2 letters there. So, and I know that y'all have got that on your product a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with AI there?
I can. So AI has got to be one of the most confusing and misused terms currently. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but when we're at CSCMP coming up, it's going to be everywhere. And the fun part is about that is you're going to look out into the audience and think, or into the show and think, okay, so what's your AI? Oh, you're using it for something and whatever. So for us, which is one I can truly speak to, AI is a journey, and we're like on the early phases of how AI is going to impact WMS. So at Logiwa, with our Logiwa IO platform, what we did is the first thing we did, we said, look, we're collecting so much data, and we'll just call it generic data because we don't care who it belongs to. Because think about it, every time someone processes, every time they pick, every time they receive, all that stuff, we know they did it. We have all that data. The problem is before AI, all you did was report on it. But in reality, all that did was gave you a bunch of reports. It's just a bunch of data. You had to do something with it. So now what we decided was we hired a team of AI experts and came in and said, here's the generic data we collect. Again, it doesn't matter who it belongs to because it's just generic data. How can we take that information and take it and compile it along with data we get from day to day, meaning I know how many steps Nathan Cheney takes. I know how many times you misscan a product because it shows me. I know how long it takes you to do a product. So now we started taking those and creating labor standards around the data. Now what the AI can do with that, the AI can start to say, okay, Nathan, in your company, you have this many orders based upon the workflows and based upon the way we're going to structure the job and the automation inside of Logiwa. We know it's going to take you X amount of time to process these orders. Oh, and by the way, we know who in your warehouse needs to be doing those because David is much better at picking those larger orders than Mary. Mary's much better at small, single e-com orders. Utilizing that data now, then the day starts to structure itself where the AI is learning, and after a period of time, it's going, hey, these orders are being sucked in automatically because remember, shopping carts and everything, the orders flow automatically. Let's say it's a Shopify integration. Well, now the AI takes over and says, I'm going to start to give these orders and put them out into a way today, and then tomorrow that might change. Because keep in mind, AI, if it's not changing, it's not really AI, it's not learning. So it has to learn. So that's how we're utilizing it. What do phase 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 look like? I think eventually you'll have the ability to do a chat GPT into the WMS like Logiwa and say, hey, I need a report for last week that shows me a throughput of all shipments I shipped to XY client. Because today you're trying to figure it out and you're trying to, do I get the right filters? Well, it already knows. The other cool thing it's doing is it's tracking, because I know how many steps you're taking, I can, and that's all based on the device, right? The device is tracking that. But since I know that information, I can start to use that, and I know that, why is Nathan taking a break over here? It's kind of weird. It does it every day. And come to find out, it's near an area of the warehouse that your buddy works. And we found out, you're chit-chatting. Or my favorite, and this is real, this really happened, is we had a customer who had a picker that was slower. They didn't know why. And they called us, they said, hey, can you guys come help us? We're like, sure. So we got on and kind of watched the picker work, and come to find out, when this picker went to a location, they weren't tall enough to reach it. They had to go get a stool every time. So what did they do? They utilized the system and go into the AI and say, hey, don't assign this picker anything above this height because they can't reach it. Well, productivity shot up. And you could argue that's not even truly AI. That's putting a workflow in place.
I was going to say that's just a little restriction of, that's a little setting.
But in reality, if you think about it, in reality, though, the AI could learn that based upon that person's ability. When it does bring the orders in, then it can look at it and go, oh, yep, they don't get that. And now AI and workflows work together. Because until we get to the point where all of our jobs are useless because AI does it. In fact, not to get off on a tangent, but I was talking to someone today about that. It's interesting to think that we're probably not far off. Think Chat GPT and think RFPs. And I think we talked about those earlier. In reality, we're probably not far off from a procurement person who's AI, right? Talking to a WMS who's AI, and them going, here, are you a fit or not? I mean, I don't think we're that far off from that. So, any of that stuff can be used in our world, but I will tell you, today it's all about utilizing the data and how much more efficient can we make an operation to save that labor. Because if I can get that ROI, which I know everybody talks ROI, but it's true. It's a reality today. People want that.
Sure. Sure. Well, there's, those pesky finance guys that want to see good use of their dollars,
They sure do.
So, well, maybe as we're wrapping up here in the last 1 or 2 minutes, David, if someone fast forwarded through this entire episode and got right here to the end, they're going to like, oh, the best part will be at the end, maybe. Is there one sort of soapbox issue or one key thing that's really close to your heart that you want to kind of leave everyone with here today?
I would say I'm going to talk to it more on the software side.
Sure.
Unfortunately, software, WMS software in general, has left a really bad taste in most people's mouths at this point for a couple of reasons. One, they've probably already been burned by one. Two, they feel like they're from a financial position or some other reason that they just don't need to make a change. And I will tell you that there are really good systems out there. You got to look for them, but they are out there. And don't be afraid to go find them like at your CSCMPs or IWLAs or whoever else you go to get this information. But there are really good systems out there. The other thing I can tell you is just because someone has done you wrong before doesn't necessarily mean that all software is bad and they're all going to give you the same thing. And I think we all fight that battle day in, day out. And I fight it in my personal life because just when I'm not selling software, I'm a consumer of whatever, and it could be anything. And I look at the same thing, and I think you make your decisions based upon people you know, what people are using, and just look at the market and look how people are positioned in the market. And I think that'll get people around the fact of there being, 1,000 different WMSs out there, and then everyone's got something bad to say about all of them. And it's like, it's really not that bad. It's really a small world we live in. And if they really take the time to look around, there are still really good people in this industry, and the industry is not going anywhere. That's for sure. It just is changing right before our eyes.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for taking a little bit of time to tell us about your story, how you got into supply chain. I really enjoyed hearing a little bit about spreadsheets and the manual way of doing things in the past, and appreciate some of your insights on WMSs and what they can do today. So
yep.
I believe that I'll be seeing you next week in Nashville at the conference.
You will. Looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.